Thank you for letting me take my mask off. It is difficult when you're talking for a long period of time with the mask on, trying to give khutbah as well at school these days, and it's very difficult. So Jazakallah khairan for coming here. I wanted to begin by saying that when preparing a presentation like this, it's a lot of information at one time, and we split it up into 6 different workshops. This is for our younger age group, and then inshallah in January, the second series will be on for the teenage years group as well. And when preparing presentations like this, there's a lot of theory when doing research and figuring out how to be the best parent possible, how to understand our kids, so on and so forth. The advantage I've had over the last 20-something years is that I'm a teacher, and I've been teaching in the classroom. I've been a guidance counselor for a number of years, and now I've been a vice principal and now a principal. So I have seen different types of kids. Kids who are good, kids who are not so good, kids who need a lot of help, kids who are good on their own. So many different types of students that we have seen. And I have my own kids at home too. And I've got 2 daughters at home, one who is 15, the other is 12. And my family is by no means perfect by at all. I've gone through the same struggles as any other parent. And the funny thing is, after so many years of experience as a guidance counselor, as a teacher, as an administrator, I would think to myself that I should know my kids pretty well. I should be able to be the best parent possible. But even after all that, I still have struggles. Sometimes my kids are great. Sometimes they're not so good. Sometimes they love me. Sometimes they hate me. Sometimes they don't want to see my face. Next time they're hugging me. So, all of us as parents are growing and learning at the same time. Each of our homes is unique. Each of our children are unique. Those who have more than one child understand that each child has their own personality, right? So what I'm sharing with us here is all of the experience and all the research I have done. But what I'm going to try and share with you are strategies that I know have worked. Strategies that have worked in my own home with my own kids. Strategies that have worked when working with kids in the classroom. Okay, so that I'm filtering out all the fluff, but there is still some theory that I want to share with you. But these workshops are centered around simple strategies, things that you may already be doing, that you might need a refresher on, and some others that you may not have thought about in the same way. Okay, so during these next few sessions, I encourage all of you to please ask questions. Okay, to make this learning your own. If I said something, you wanted me to say it again, you don't understand what I'm trying to share, ask me, please. Because I'm here to share, genuinely. I don't pretend to be the fountain of all knowledge. If there's something you have a question about I don't know, I will certainly find out for you. And that's what teachers are good at, right? When we don't know something, we figure out where to look for it, to get the answer for those who need it. For those who are online, there are many more people online. I cannot see your questions, but you can certainly type them in, and at the end, I'll try to go through your questions as well. My email address is up here on the screen, so you can always email me. You can take a picture if you like. You can email me whenever you need. If you have questions, again, if I said something in the presentation you want me to repeat, if you'd rather a phone call, we can arrange that as well. MyParentingProject.com is a group of brothers who are trying to record some of my workshops and make a website out of it. They gave me the title, but I don't think the website is up yet. It leads to another website, but inshallah one day that will come soon as well. Are there any questions before we begin? Okay. So what are we actually doing today specifically? We're going to spend some time understanding behavioral challenges. We're going to understand the child's world. Oftentimes when we look at our children, we're looking at them from the point of view of an adult, right? I'll give you a quick example to illustrate what I mean. When I first started teaching, I was 23 years old, and I would connect with the male students in my science and English classes about wrestling, WWE. I loved it, they loved it, it was great. And a couple years later, I think it was my second or third year of teaching, I was 25. And all of a sudden, sweaty men in underwear running around a ring didn't seem as appealing to me anymore. And I thought, what have I been watching this my whole life? And all of a sudden, I just couldn't relate to them anymore. I couldn't relate to the same WWE. I had difficulty with the kids. I had difficulty relating in the same manner because my mind had shifted, right? And for those who are a background in psychology or social work, 25 is a major milestone in terms of psychological development, as is 40, 65, and so on. And we'll cover that in another lecture, I think 2 weeks from two sessions from now. But the point is that as we grow older, we become much more distant from our kids. And if I'm 30 years from my kids, if I'm 20 years from my kids, if I'm 45 years from my kids, there is a gap. There's a gap in the way I think about the same things differently as an adult than I did when I was a kid, right? So it's something for us to keep in mind. How to encourage your children and yourself when mistakes are made, and understanding that we have been made as imperfect human beings. We're not perfect by any standard, and so we are going to make mistakes, and that's the point of parenting. That's the point of living life, is to actually make those mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. My father always taught me, always learn from the mistakes of others, because you can never live long enough to make them all yourself. Right? So I'm going to be sharing some of my mistakes as a parent here as well, so that you can also benefit, right? And my mistakes as a teacher, as an educator, and also as an administrator, so that you can also benefit from that as well, right? So to get us started, it's always important to start with the minds-on activity, just something to get to know who we are and for us to spend some time. So if you turn to your first page of your worksheet, the first and second page, there is a bit of an icebreaker activity there. So I'm going to ask you on your worksheet to write down the names of all your family members from oldest to youngest, and pets. Pets are optional, but if you have pets, you can write their names down as well. I have 2 cats at home. And on the second page are adjectives. So I'd like you to write down the names of all the people in your family, and then write down 3 adjectives that describe them. So write down their name, their age, and then 3 adjectives. Yep. So, oh, we are. Sorry, we are. We're recording on Zoom. I'm not sure. I'm not in charge of the recording. In fact, I have to make sure we are recording, so I think we might be paused. Is it on? It's blinking. That means it's on, right? I think so. Okay. So again, write down the names of your family members with their age and 3 adjectives that describe them. For those who are at home, I did email the worksheet, so hopefully you're following along at home. You have the other worksheet? All right. Oh, okay. $30. And once you have written down some adjectives, I'm going to invite you to come up with a descriptive name for your family. So instead of being the Khan family, for example, maybe, or the Abdullah family, looking at the adjectives that you use to describe your family members, try to come up with a new name for your family. You can use another adjective on the adjective page to come up with a name for your family. And if anybody's brave enough or feels comfortable enough, perhaps we can share any names you may have. Anybody like to share the name of their family? An adjective that describes kind of everybody in the household? Okay, go ahead.
My family's name is the Rugrats.
The Rugrats. Excellent, thank you. Anybody else like to share? So my family is called the busy family because everybody's just too busy. When they get older, they don't have time for anybody. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on. But this is an exercise for us to consider so that we start to look at who our children are, who our family members are. How do we see them? How do we even see ourselves when it comes to our children through these adjectives and through other adjectives? It helps us to understand where we're starting from. And that's the point of this activity. Each one of us here has a starting point, right? And from the starting point, our children are going to grow. We are going to grow. And that's something that we have to remember as parents, is that we are constantly growing. My first child, I was 27. Now I'm 46. So over that long period of time, I have changed, right? I have grown. I am not the same person I was 20-something years ago, right? So as we grow and as we change, our kids are also changing as well. Which is why oftentimes, if you ever look at the grandparents have a whole category unto themselves. They finish growing. And that's why grandparents are always so chilled, relaxed, they break all the rules, right? You say no candy, and what do? They give the kids candy, right? Because they've already grown, they've stopped growing. But our kids are growing and we are growing with our kids. So to know that we are in a constant state of growth, we need to look at ourselves too. It's not just looking at our kids and how they're growing and what their development is and what their adjectives are. What were my adjectives when I was 15? How would my parents have described me? How would I describe myself when I was 15? Right? And how would I describe myself maybe 10 years from now, 15 years from now? Or when my children were firstborn, what adjectives would I have used then versus now? So I invite you to really consider this activity as something to reflect upon and ask ourselves the question, who was I, where am I, and where will I be? Who will I be as a parent? And then start looking at our kids as well. So moving on, the SPICES framework, and this is a single page that you have with you. Okay, so I handed a single page as well. And at home, I emailed a single page, just maybe around I think 6 o'clock or so, or 5:30. You have the worksheet and then a single sheet as well. So SPICES is a framework to understand the child, to understand human beings in general for that matter. It's something that I learned many, many years ago as a teacher and as a guidance counselor. When university students in college, or when universities and colleges are looking for their students, what kind of student are they looking for? Anybody know? And they don't care about marks, so it's another word I'm looking for. Well-rounded. Well-rounded, and that's what SPICES is. It shows a well-rounded framework. So we're not just focusing on the academics of our children. We're not just focusing, maybe some families just focus on sports, for example. Tiger Woods is a good example of that. Wayne Gretzky is another good example of that, right? But if you look at the whole child holistically, as the child continues to grow and develop, all parts of them are growing. Some parts are going to grow faster than others. Some will become more honed and more attuned than others, because every human being is unique and has their own strengths and challenges. But at the same time, we are taking all parts of our children as we watch them grow. But before we get to our children, we have to start with ourselves, right? And that's why this whole series of workshop is about young kids, because we're still young enough, as if we have younger kids at home, you're still young enough as a parent to take some time and ask ourselves the question, where am I in the spices framework? Okay, so in the spices framework, you're going to start with, what's the first S? Okay, so sociability. Sometimes parents want their children to be outgoing. You should be having 100 friends on the street. You should be holding parties every weekend. Some parents have this idea that their children should be like automatically somehow social. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, how social am I? What type of interpersonal skills do I demonstrate, or do I role model for my child? Personally, I'm an introvert. I don't have a very large social life. So my expectations of my children have to be measured accordingly, right? But I'm a big reader. I'm an avid reader. Tons and tons of books. So many books, I had to put them in the garage. So the expectation of my children also being attuned to reading and wanting to read, I've been role modeling that for them their whole life. So yes, that's something that they've also developed, right? So if you look intellectual, right? So after sociability, you have physical development, intellectual development. So physically, we want our children to be fit. We want them to be eating healthy. But if I'm bringing Nutella and Doritos and chocolate bars into the home, and that's what I'm feeding my kids, Eggo waffles in the morning or something like that, then really, how am I really supporting them physically in terms of their physical development? And when they are 25 years old and they've got a giant gut and they eat 5 donuts a day or something, where is my expectation versus how I've been raising them, right? So we have to ensure that the household that we are creating is conducive with the expectations we have for our children. There's intellectual development, there's creative development. Oftentimes parents want to know, what's my kid talented at? We assume our kids should be good at basketball because they're always outside playing basketball. Therefore, they're the next Michael Jordan or next Kyle Lowry, right? But is that really what they're doing outside? Someone coaching them, or am I coaching them as a parent? What am I doing with my child to help them with their creativity? What am I doing to help them develop that talent? What talent am I demonstrating? And talent, as we'll talk about in a few moments, is not always related to sports, right? Oftentimes people think about talent with sports and music, and that's about it. But there's much more to talent than that, especially when it comes to creativity. Then there's the emotional part of our children. And the emotional part is something we have to ask ourselves as a parent, as an adult, how emotionally stable am I? Do I panic? Do I have anxiety? Do I demonstrate that anxiety in front of my kids? Do I yell and scream all day because I'm freaking out all the time? How do I handle stress, and what am I teaching my children by how I demonstrate and role model my stress reaction? And the last one, of course, is spirituality. If I want my children to read Quran and to make that part of their lives, if I want my children to be praying 5 times a day, if I want them to attend Jummah, in the future, when they're older, 20, 25 years old, am I showing that, demonstrating that for them at an early age? What am I sharing with my kids? Right? So it's very important for us to look at ourselves first before we start looking at our kids. And the reason I've said this maybe about 10 times, we're talking about ourselves before we talk about our kids, because again, as a parent, there's something I learned. And something I'll share that I used, it's a very strange habit I have of talking to people, not about the weather and politics. I ask them about their family, I ask them about how they raise their kids. I ask them about what has worked, what has not worked with their kids. These are conversations I've actually had with my friends. Sometimes they think I'm a little kooky, but they know I'm a teacher, so it's okay. So one of my friends, his name is also Omar, and when he got married, when his wife was expecting their first child, they changed their lives. They were not really a practicing family before that. But as soon as they were expecting, everything started to change because they began to prepare the home for the coming of their child. And my friend Omar, he actually started to work out. He started to take care of his body. He quit smoking. He started to come to the masjid every day. He would pick me up when we come to the masjid together, or we meet there together. So people need to make changes with their lives. And so I learned from his example that we had to prepare ourselves for our children being in the home. Right? So it is important for us to always look at where are my deficits, where are my own challenges, and try to fill them in as much as possible. So the point of this concept of spices is this question here. And this is on your worksheet. It's the 4th page in. It's a little chart. Please imagine your child is now 25 years old and has knocked on your door for a surprise visit, right? They've graduated from college or university, right? Because by about 23, 24, they've graduated. And by 25, maybe they have their own place, or maybe they're still living at home, whatever it might be. But they knock on the door for a surprise visit. What kind of person do you hope to see in front of you? So if your child right now is 10 years old or 15 years old, imagine 15, 10 years from now, who do you want to see standing in front of you? What types of adjectives do you want to see represented by your child when they're 25 years old, standing in front of you at your door? What characteristics and life skills will he or she have? Okay, so please take a moment and write that down in the column that says age 25. Okay, so just focus on age 25. I'm going to ask you to go through the 6 parts of the SPICES model. And you can use the actual stencil, the standalone page, as a model for some questions if you want to kind of, like, what should I be thinking about? You can look at that gray sheet because it has some questions there. If that kind of gets your mind going a bit. So I'll give you a good 5 minutes to work on that, please. The separate sheet, I think there's more. Sorry, trying to get the gray sheet here. Remember the thing is 8:30, so we'll try to finish by 8:30. We'll try to take it. I might go a bit longer, but I'll try to fix it. So as you're filling that, I just want to maybe add a small caveat. There's a small tidbit. In Surah Isra, verse 23, chapter 17, verse 23, this is the famous ayah that a lot of parents like to quote to their children as they get older and when their children are giving them a bit of a hard time. You know, obey Allah, right? Like have taqwa, be dutiful to Allah, and be kind to your parents. And sometimes we translate it as obey your parents, right? But in fact, in the Arabic, it's be kind to your parents. Treat your parents with a good treatment, with kindness, right? With good manners. So you know, when your 25-year-old child is standing in front of you, likely you want them to have good manners. So think about that as you're filling in the sheet. Like what kind of social skills will they need to have in order to show good manners to their children? What kind of spiritual connection would you want to see in them with their Lord and Creator Allah, so they will have good manners and morals in front of their parents even at age 25? Someone share that your family's name is natural disaster. Can't see the full page, it's cutting off from the left side. Maybe because the camera's in the way. I'll move that out of the way. So I've closed the camera, so people online maybe should be able to see maybe perhaps more now. I see most people are getting down towards the bottom. So I would like to explain this concept of why we're starting at age 25. And sometimes I think we think that we would want to go in incremental age. But in education, everything is always about backwards design. At the beginning of a semester, I'll sit down, I'll look at the kids in front of me, look at the curriculum. I'm going to ask myself the question, by the time January rolls around or June, depending on the semester I'm teaching, what do my students need to know so they can be successful in grade 10 science or in grade 11 biology or grade 12 biology? So I want to know what they need to have at the end. So when we look at our kids, the reason I'm inviting us all here to think about, what do I want when my kid is 25? When they're I'm about to become an empty nester and the kids are going off on their own, they're about to get married and live on their own. What do I want at that time? And then how am I going to get there? right? So in science, I'll have my 10 enduring understandings, and then I'll say, okay, by the end of the first month, I have to cover this. By the end of the second month, I have to cover this. By the third month, I have to cover this. So by the time the fourth month comes around, I'm beginning to have to be relaxed. The kids are getting ready for the exam, and we're good. Same thing here. When we write down where we want our kids to be when they're 25, then we ask, okay, what do I need to do by the time they're 10 years old? Where should they be by the time they're 10 years old? Where should they be by the time they're 15 years old? Where should they be by the time they're 20 years old? This is called backwards design. So you start at the end and you work backwards to however old your child is now. You may have multiple children at different ages, which is perfectly fine. So you start for each child differently, wherever their age is. And with some kids, you maybe have 5 years to work with them. Other kids, you may have 10 or 15 or 20 years, depending on how old your children are. But when you do this activity, you will start to create your own milestones. You're not relying on society to set those milestones for you. Now, why is that so important? Because as an educator, I'll share with you, we have something called differentiated instruction. It means that not every kid learns the same, right? It's not a cookie cutter model in education. A good teacher is going to learn every single child's learning style and their modality of learning, so you can cater your teaching to each child and groups of children. And the same thing for us as parents. Each child is unique. If all I do is pick up a book and look at the milestones in a book, I might not meet all the needs of my child, or I might dumb down my child, right? So, for example, my older child, she started reading at a very early age. So if I had stunted her, goes, okay, you can't read this. You're only 2 years old. You're 3 years old. You can't read. I'm going to, we'll wait till you're 6 years old, then we'll teach you how to read. Then I would have lost on that opportunity. Right? So it's important for us to look at our children and the standards our children are setting for themselves, right? And making our own milestones along the way and along that journey of parenting, and to revisit this sheet over and over again. Now, I'm going to spend some time going into more detail about the framework so you can understand what exactly are we looking for. You have the question sheet in front of you, but let's go through some more detail about what all of these 6 frameworks are about. So, social development. Okay, so there's a very famous dua that we have in Surah Furqan, Surah chapter 25, verse 74. رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Let them be the leaders of the ummah. So this is a dua that parents will often make. Forgive me as I butcher my Arabic here. I'm not reading it. It's not very tiny writing here for me. But we make this dua for our children, and because we want our children to become leaders. But in order for them to become leaders, they have to have certain skills. And these social skills that are on the screen here, this is what develops leadership. Okay, so you need to know this is part of that social development. So as our kids are growing from the age of 0 to age 25, and even beyond that for that matter, these are the skills they're going to need. Social skills means, how do you talk with people? How do you communicate with them? How do your tone of voice, the loudness with which you speak, the confidence in your voice, okay? Now, where might you actually start helping your children find opportunities to develop that skill? Anybody know? Where do Canadians mostly go first thing in the morning on the way to work? Think white people if you want to. Coffee shop, they often go to Tim Hortons. What can you do with Tim Hortons? You make an order, right? So as soon as your kids start developing some vocabulary, they can start making their own order. It doesn't have to be Tim Hortons. I'm just giving that as an example. It could be anywhere. But kids making their own orders, if you take them to the ice cream store and they go to the Baskin Robbins and they make their order there, right? They start to develop confidence and the ability to speak to others who are strangers. They don't always get that with their peers, because again, we're talking about leadership skills. We're talking about 25 years from, like when they're 25 years old, not especially when they're young or even when they're older. So that social skills development, being able to talk to other people, okay, and being able to have confidence when they speak to other people as well. Resolving conflicts. We have siblings sometimes in the home, and sometimes siblings get into conflict. How do we teach our kids how to resolve conflict? Sometimes they have conflict with their friends on the street, sometimes with their cousins. How do we help them navigate that process of resolving a conflict? Do we ever spend time with them role-playing how to resolve conflicts? You play the devil's advocate, so to speak, and you have a conversation with them and teach them the skills. How do you say, I'm sorry? How do you move on from that? How do you be patient and distinguish the anger a person might feel, right? How do you put yourself in the other person's shoes and start developing empathy? How am I impacting others? So these are some of the skills that we need to teach our kids so that they know how to resolve conflict. Because inshallah, one day as leaders, no matter where they are, right, whether an engineer, whether they're a doctor or a lawyer, but an accountant or a teacher, or working in an office somewhere as an accountant, doesn't matter. Wherever they are, we want them to show those leadership skills so that they can progress and become the best of humanity, of course, the best of our ummah as well. And resolving conflicts for those who are in positions of management, those in positions of working within a team, you would know that resolving conflict, conflict happens quite often, and the ability to resolve conflict is very important, to have that ability, to have that skill. Social norms, knowing what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, right? Sometimes kids are so innocent that they just blab out the weirdest things at the wrong time, and it can be very embarrassing for families, right? So teaching our kids as early as possible, understanding that they're kids and they're still growing, what are some social norms? There are some social norms as they get older around gender, right? Mixing with the opposite gender, and what are some of the limitations in that at certain ages, like maybe age 15 or age 20, or in between that age. There might be some social norms in terms of how you address grandparents, or how elders address, how young kids address elders. Saying assalamu alaikum when someone comes to your home, shaking the hand. What do you do when you go to the masjid? All of these social norms that people are accustomed to. Not raising your voice so loudly. When you're in a quiet setting. For example, you go to the library, it's silent time, right? When you go to the mall, even a funny situation. My child is very young, and it's Square One Mall, and a lady walks by and she's wearing a short skirt, and my child yells out, "Abi, she's naked," and everybody can hear it. Everybody hears it, right? It's a bit embarrassing. I said, "MashaAllah," okay, that we're Muslim here, but understand those social norms. Now, she was very young. I'm not going to correct that behavior at that age. But if he was 10 years old, I might say, that's not appropriate to say that out loud. If we share that thought later, right? So understanding what is appropriate, what's not appropriate in social settings. Relating to others, right? Being able to understand how do others live their lives, right? Now, these days around the whole GTA, it seems, there are beggars everywhere. Have you seen them? Right, they're always on the street somewhere with the signs, "I'm sick," or "I need food," or whatever it is. There are beggars everywhere. I'm shocked at how much they've grown, especially in Mississauga area. It's quite surprising. There's more in Mississauga than there are in Brampton, which is interesting. So helping kids understand, what does it mean to be grateful for what we have? How do we appreciate all the things that Allah has given us? And how do we look at other people living their lives? And how do we be empathetic towards others, those who have less than us? Perhaps we adopt a child as part of the family, right? Islamic Relief, ICNA Canada, they all have relief. ICNA Canada, what's it called? ICNA Relief, thank you. ICNAReliefCanada.org. You can sponsor a child. Islamic Relief, you can sponsor a child. These are ways to help kids relate to others, their same age or younger or older than them, right? By asking questions. How do you think such and such feels? How do you think those people feel when they're going through such and such? It was very simple. It's wintertime coming pretty soon. You might be in a car driving with your kids to school or to the masjid or wherever you're going, and you see people freezing in the snow at the bus shelter, and they're all cold and waiting for the bus to come. And you may ask a question, so what do you think those people are going through right now in the cold? Should we be grateful? Should we show appreciation to Allah? How do we do that? Right? Pointing these things out. These are just tidbits to point out to kids so they can start to understand and grow empathy for how other people are living their lives as well. And of course, functioning in a group, being able to at least, kids by default are introverts. Kids by default have anxiety. Kids by default are shy. But being able to work in a group, whether it's on a soccer team or a baseball team, working in a small group at school in a teamwork or a group work assignment or something of that sort, this is an essential skill, not only for leadership, but just to get along in everyday life. Most, other than before COVID has changed a lot of things, but we don't all live in isolation. Most people, when they're at work, they're working with others, right? Even if they're working as a shopkeeper, they're working with customers coming in. So that ability to work in a group is very important. And you might start that at home. At home, the whole family gets together and bakes a cake. That's teamwork, that's group work. The whole family gets together and vacuums a room together, or cleans up the bedroom together, or whatever it might be. Right? This is a group work. This is an example of how we can start developing those skills in our kids when they're young. So that's social development. Next is around physical development, okay? And these are the three parts of physical development itself, okay? So mobility, being able to move around and walk around, being able to run. This is what we look for our children as they continue to grow and get stronger, and they go from crawling to walking to running and so on and so forth. So this is definitely part of mobility, but also having the ability to sit still. Young children have a big problem with that. And when they go to school, One of the biggest pet peeves of elementary teachers is when kids just won't sit still. But the problem with that, there's no problem with that at home, but in a school setting, and this is probably being prepared for school, in a school setting, if they're getting up and walking around randomly when the teacher is teaching, they're going to miss out on their education, and they might become disengaged when the teacher keeps saying, Abdullah, please sit down. I told you 5 times, and Abdullah gets embarrassed in front of his friends, right? So mobility and lack of mobility and getting prepared for school, and so they can be successful in school as well. Health, of course, providing the best food, the best nutrition, right? As kids get older, their palate will change, right? When they're young, they like prunes, they like cauliflower, they'll eat broccoli, but when they're 12 or 13, all of a sudden they don't like those things anymore. So while they're young, get them, right? You get to give them the best food while they're young, so their bones can grow healthy and their blood is healthy, and all our children from many of these childhood illnesses that come about. But teaching them at a very young age, whatever we bring in the home is healthy for them to eat. Even if we bring chocolate in the home, it's 60% cocoa, which means that it's dark chocolate. 60% is still bearable, it's not bitter, right? But whatever you bring in the home, whatever we all bring in the home, let us make sure that it is healthy for our kids to eat, even if it's sweet food, right? Even with sweet foods all the time, if you can learn how to make it at home, there's less garbage in it, less preservatives in it. And it's a skill that all of our kids can learn, regardless of gender or even age for that matter, right? So when kids are in the home, they feel and they know that whatever's in the home is healthy for them to eat, right? And that's something I learned from my father-in-law. I went grocery shopping with him one day, and it took a lot longer than I normally would take myself, right? But I learned how to buy fruits and vegetable that was fresh, right? And that would be good for the body. And he taught me that day. He said, when it comes to food, don't spare a dime. Right? The health of your family comes first. That's one lesson my father-in-law taught me. Right? So bringing healthy food in the home, no matter what it is. Fine and gross motor skills. So fine motor skills is like being able to write with a pencil or a pen, right? Very small movements. Gross motor skills are sports and activities. Kids by default are good at gross motor activities, but it takes a long time for them to develop fine motor skills. So one way you can do that is through painting and cutting with scissors. These are activities you can do for kids when they're of age. You can buy safety scissors, but cutting things with paper, cutting things into small pieces, right? And painting with a brush, these are ways to develop fine motor skills, right? Oftentimes they don't get that until maybe senior kindergarten or even grade 1. So you can start that as, even as early as age 2, age 3, they can start getting involved in that. And kids love small things. So you give them a piece of paper and say, cut it as small as you can. They can get them to very, very small little specks, and they like doing that work, right? So just a good way to develop that physical development. Intellectual development is probably where we spend most of our time, and there's nothing wrong with that. Intellectual development is a key to success, long-term for leadership and long-term for success in general. So critical thinking, critical literacy. What does this mean? It means being able to look at anything and dissect what they are seeing. This is important as a lifelong skill because we as human beings are bombarded day in and day out with advertisements and marketing. Anybody going on the Gardner Expressway downtown Toronto, we've seen those big giant billboards all the time, right? Everywhere we go, turning on the TV, listening to the news, listening to something on the radio, picking up a magazine, no matter what it is, marketing is always going on. And sometimes we just fall into it. We don't even think about it. We don't realize we're changing, and yet we are. So teaching our kids how to dissect what they're seeing. And this can start as early as the time that they can start to talk. Okay, when they're able to make full sentences, start having conversations with them. You bring them to the masjid. Why is the carpet green in almost every masjid we go to? Ever think about that? We accept it as normal. Anybody know why? Nobody knows? What's the color of the garment of paradise given to parents who raise their children in Islam? It's a green silk garment given to parents in Jannah for those parents who raise their children within Islam, right? That's why people oftentimes equate the color green with Jannah. That's why most carpets in most masjids, they'll choose green, right? So it's something interesting to think about. Why in this masjid do they have wainscoting at the back over there? Anybody know why? Why do we have wainscoting all around the masjid? And why is it exactly 3 feet high? Something to think about. Why do we have one-way mirrors over there? Why do we have so many clocks in the masjid? Why do we have a camera system over there showing us outside? Right? If you're outside of a store, a restaurant, why did they pick the decor? Why did they just choose this color? Right? Why did they have the menu looking in this way? Why is it later in this fashion? When you're at the checkout counter at North Hills, why is it always that all the gum and chocolate is right at the checkout counter at North Hills? Where your kids can say, can I want that, I want that, I want that? Why is that? This is all part of critical literacy and critical thinking. Asking those questions. And kids from a very young age are very imaginative. They can give you interesting answers. And it's good to bring out that thought pattern for them to start thinking critically about the world around them. You don't. It's a conversation. And you can give your 2 cents and they can give their 2 cents. And as they get older and you have those same conversations, you'll find that they start to align at a certain point, right? But it can be as simple as, so in Brampton, we get the Brampton Guardian. It's like on every Thursday night, Mississauga and Mississauga News, maybe Oakville gets something as well. They'll always come with flyers. What if you took the flyers and dissect the flyers, right? So one time I didn't notice this myself, my child, when she was maybe around, maybe 7 or 8 years old, she noticed that the IGA flyer, I'll never forget, IGA and Metro flyer were exactly the same flyer, but one was colored blue and one was colored orange, right? She noticed, and I said, which one would you pick? I picked the orange. She said, why? Because it's more colorful. Which one would I pick? Blue, because my favorite color. Right? So it's interesting just having those conversations, right? But just find opportunities as much as possible. If you look up, go on YouTube, Dr. Alan Luke, with one L, Alan, A-L-A-N, Dr. Alan Luke, critical thinking. Okay, look on YouTube. He gave a lecture at OISE, at University of Toronto downtown. And it's a very quick clip on what is critical literacy and why it's so important. In that point, he talks about cereal, I think. He talks about all the different boxes of cereal and why they look different and what attracts what kind of clientele, right? So he talks about the importance of critical literacy and critical thinking in elementary level kids. Vocabulary building, teaching our kids different kind of words, right? And not being afraid or shy to teach them even like really large words. I remember my child was not feeling very happy about getting in trouble about something. She said to me, I'm feeling discombobulated. I had to look up in the dictionary. I heard the word before, but I'm an English teacher, but I couldn't remember what it meant, right? So kids can come up with fancy words as well. I found that she learned it on My Friend Rabbit, which is a cartoon she used to watch. But there's a lot of vocabulary we can teach our kids and teaching them larger words, different ways to say the same thing. If you have a thesaurus at home, you can look at thesaurus.com or download thesaurus.com to your phone. You can teach them different synonyms of the same thing, right? Shocked, flabbergasted, astonished. What did she say? I'm shocked, flabbergasted, astonished, perturbed, disturbed, all at the same time, right? That's the catchphrase in our household, right? The synonyms is exactly the same thing, but it's just vocabulary building, right? So if you go to Dollarama, actually around New Year's time, there's a small calendar that you can buy. It's a little paper one says word of the day. And this is where we started as a family. We started learning a word of the day for the whole 365 words for the whole day. Not all of them stuck, but some of them stuck more than others, right? Some of them are more funnier than others. Logic and mathematics, okay? So this is the left-sided element of the brain. Now, this is not for everybody. Not all kids are left-sided of the brain. Some are more right-sided than left-sided, or vice versa. But there's always both sides of the brain to develop. When teaching our kids logic and mathematics, it's very important not to teach them just 1 + 1 = 2, because there's no context. But if you say, if I have 1 apple plus 1 apple, how many apples do I have? I've got 2 apples, which is why if you look at elementary workbooks, they always have depictions of something associated with math, not just numbers. So whenever we're talking to children, it has to be concrete, not abstract. Okay, it has to be concrete, something that's tangible, something they can see and understand what they're looking at. Okay, so this is something that we need to be aware of when teaching them mathematics. And again, every family is going to be different. Work towards your strengths. Okay. Again, my children are different. One's very good at math, one's very good at English, and so on. So my older one, who doesn't like math all that much, when I was trying to get her interested in math, I got involved in word problems because she loved reading the word problems, right? And when kids are young, if you can get tactile objects to hold on to, then they can also learn from those tactile objects too. Language development. So if you speak more than one language at home, if you can teach more than one language to your kid or expose them to more than one language, this also increases the right side of the brain growth. It also increases a lot of the interconnectivity between both hemispheres of the brain. And then build in them curiosity, right? Provide for them opportunities for them to think and to learn. And Curious George is not the best example of curiosity. So you might want to avoid that book, because not exactly, it always helps your teachers because they get into trouble. Magically, they're okay, but not always. So being aware of curiosity. Okay. Creative development, being creative. Again, we talked about talents. So talents can also include math, science, observations, cooking, right? Kid cleaning up, being able to dress themselves. The measure of success for each child depends on the child themselves. I'll give you an example about one child who the child just showing up to school every day is success for that child because of the amount of mental illness that they're carrying with them. Okay, so everybody's going to have a different measure in terms of what their success looks like. And as parents, when it comes to talents, we want to honor all talents that our kids have. Even lining up the shoes in the closet is a talent, right? Color coordinating what they're wearing that day is a talent, right? And all of these talents are examples of illustrations of self-expression. What color they choose to wear, what color of ball they want to buy, what kind of food that they like, what kind of tastes do they like, what kind of subjects do they like. So if a child likes reading, you say reading is useless. You're not going to become an English teacher. You must love math and science because everything in this world is about STEM. So forget about English. That's not honoring the child, right? So allowing them to have their own self-expression and learn about where they're going to become and where they're going to go in the future. And then encouraging out-of-the-box thinking. So it is important that we allow our kids when they're young to not become corrupted by ourselves. We as parents have lived a long life, alhamdulillah, and we have been shaped and we have made up our mind about everything. We have made up our mind. We have rules that we live our lives by. There's a reason we pray 5 times a day. There's a reason we Quran. There's a reason I cook this way. There's a reason I eat these things. There's a reason I exercise this way. There's a reason for everything that we do because we have lived long enough to make a system of belief and a framework of understanding how to live life for ourselves. That's why we're adults. Kids don't have that same framework. So if a male child at age 2 wants to vacuum the house, let him vacuum the house. Okay, let him vacuum the house. Because that's something that that child wants to do. That's part of their creativity, okay? Out of the box thinking encourages kids to not be sheltered and blinded that you can only think or believe this, but let them be creative in everything that they're doing. There's a Dawood Warnsby, if you know who he is, he lives in Kitchener. He's a singer. He sings some nasheeds, specifically children's nasheeds. And he has a song talking about a child painting. The child wants to paint the rose purple, and the teacher's getting angry. It must be red, And so the whole purpose of the song was about allowing kids to be creative in how they think. Emotional time. That's emotional development. I'm running out of time. Emotional development. So empathy, resilience, self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-regulation. These are the elements of emotional development. So emotional development does not necessarily mean being happy and being sad or being angry and mad. It's about understanding what is emotion, and that emotion is a response to a trigger. Someone brings you a cake and says, Eid Mubarak, and you think, oh, mashallah, I'm so happy now, right? There's a trigger and there's a response, right? Someone pushes you over and you fall down and your books fall down, you get angry. There's an emotional response to the trigger, okay? That's what emotions are about. That's what emotional development is about. Understanding what my emotions are and how I react in certain situations. And then what's appropriate in the way I react. So if I'm at school and I'm talking with my friend while the teacher is teaching, that's a social skill development. But when the teacher says, Abdullah, stop talking when I'm teaching, now Abdullah's going to do a few things. Abdullah can yell, I can talk when I want to. I am Abdullah. My mother said this about me, right? Or Abdullah might be shy and start crying. Or Abdullah might grab his books and run out of the school because he's so embarrassed, right? Or Abdullah might go under his desk and become an ostrich because he's so embarrassed. Right? So that emotional response is what we want to teach our kids. We have to observe what is their emotional response and then teach them there's more than one way to react. And we start to help them develop an emotional menu. So it's not just one thing on the menu, but there's more than one thing. So, and this takes time. So when you get angry, you can yell and scream, or you can go to your bedroom and scream into your pillow. And then when you've calmed down, come back down, we can talk about it. Or when you're angry, sit down for a minute, count to 10. Lie down if you're still angry. We know the sunnah, right? Sit down, lie down, right? And sometimes you have to tell them the sunnah, just tell them to do it. And they'll find that it works, inshallah, right? When they get older, you can tell them about Islam. Sometimes when they're growing up, it confuses them. But the point is that you teach them these skills on how to improve or increase their behavioral menu. With all of that, as they start to increase their behavioral menu and be able to control their emotional response, that's when they start to feel, you know what? I'm okay. I know how to live life. I know how to live life in a setting, at school, in the community, and at home. I can get along with people. This is part of the internal dialogue that we all have, right? And that's self-confidence and self-esteem, which we'll expand upon in a couple sessions from now. Okay. Spiritual development. Okay. Do we all understand what Furqan is? Oh, sorry. Yes, please go ahead. It's up to, so it depends on the age of the child and how, the question is, if the child already has a good response, should we still teach them like an alternative way? If they have a good response, and it depends on their age. So if they're young, you can say something like, "I'm really happy the way you reacted to that. Your grandparents said such and such to you, and you said you did this and this." You repeat to them their behavior. You said, "I really appreciate what you did." It's very specific feedback. When they're older, you might say, "That was great the way you handled that. I wonder if you had a chance to redo that, how else might you handle it? How else might you respond?" When they're old enough to know that there's more than one way to respond to a situation, right? Your kid has a presentation in class in grade 5, and you do like a speech or something. You say, "MashaAllah, that was great. I like you did X, Y, and Z." If you let me ask you a question. If you had to do this again, the same speech next year, when you're slightly older, what do you think you might do differently? Right. So when they have the skills to have that ability to think about alternatives, that's what I would do for positive reactions. For negative reactions, I would teach them as much as possible all the way through, right? Even when they become older. So as a principal, when you're saying the kid's in trouble, right, you have to ask them questions. So what could you have done differently? Right? Instead of bullying that kid, instead of using swear words with your teacher, what else could you have said? How could you handle that differently? Right. So it's about giving the child a chance to learn and to understand, and to also come up with their own way of learning too. Yep. They don't have
I keep their I show them different ways of emotional friendship. Showing them they're not accepting how to do it.
The question is, if you are teaching your child and you're trying to tell them this is a better way to respond, and they're not accepting, they're not changing their way, how do you work around that? So a couple of things. One is that you ask them the question, how do you think that person felt? Right? Empathy. How do you think that, how did that impact? When you swore at your grandmother just because she was giving you some candy, and you said, my parents don't give, I'm not that candy or whatever it might be, and you swore at her, you said a bad word to her, you were rude to her, disrespected her, how do you think that made her feel? So start with empathy. So what's the impact I'm having on somebody else around me? Okay, now can I teach you, or can we try? I'm going to pretend to be your grandparent, and now I'm going to teach you what to say, and you're going to repeat after me. One of the biggest difficulties kids have and why they resist is lack of vocabulary. They don't have enough words to say. Okay, adults have the same problem too. Sometimes we're dealing with the situation and we don't have the words how to express what we are going through at that time. So if you want to look this up, there's a book called Life Scripts. I can't remember who the publisher is. It's called Life Scripts. You might even find it online for free now. It's not a new book, it's an older book, but it gives like when you're faced with a conflict at work, here's what you can say. When you have a conflict with a customer, if a new customer is coming in, you want to get their sales, what might you say? So it's a series of like one-liners on this vocabulary on how to communicate with people, right? So it's about giving them words, right? So that they can understand. You have to forgive me, I'm going to finish off spiritual development. I only have 5 minutes left, and I realize 8:30 is coming up, so I apologize. Okay, so developing a Furqan. Everybody know what Furqan is? Or anybody can explain to us? So Furqan is the ability to understand or distinguish between right and wrong, right? To be able to distinguish between right and wrong. We're all built in with the fitra, so we know what's right, which is why you'll find that all human beings know murdering is wrong. We know gambling is wrong. We know stealing is wrong. We know lying is wrong. Human beings know this from birth. It's not something they need religion for. We all have this as part of our fitra. Every human being is born with this, right? But this is what makes it akin to Ibrahim al-Hanifa, right? The Hanif, the way of being straight, okay? So Furqan is knowing what's right from wrong. This is something that we need to teach our children. We do it already, but it's not maybe cognizant of it. But when they try to put their hand on a hot stove, we immediately stop them, right? Because we're trying to teach them right from wrong. But that also comes in their learning and their vocabulary as well. So making sure that they know not to lie, not to steal, not to cheat, reminding them of things that they may already know. And that's part of the fitrah. Also teaching them as they get older, from 15 and on, about balancing dunya and akhirah, right? Being able to pray and make dua, but also at the same time excel in their studies, excel in making friends, excel in developing all the skills that we've spoken about already. And then focusing on the relationship with Allah and the Quran. Now, one thing I'm going to mention here, and that is that when our children become teenagers, when they go from 10, 11, 12 to 13, 14, 15, there is going to be a massive, massive, massive disconnect between them and the Quran. If it doesn't happen at that age, it will happen at the age of 20 to 25. I'm sharing that with you now so you can be prepared for it, okay? And the response to that is to just focus on the relationship with Allah, for them not to let go of that. I'm mentioning that to you because what I have noticed over the last 20 years is that when I would get calls from families, I was oftentimes dealing with younger kids, 12, 13, 14, grade 8, grade 9. In the last 2 years, every single 100% of the calls I'm getting are for kids who are 20 to 25 to even 30. In fact, the last one I got was age 32 in Alberta. So the problems are becoming at a later stage. Okay, so it's interesting what's happening in our ummah, just noticing it around. So I'm just sharing that with you. There will be a disconnect. Focus on the relationship with Allah, and then allow them to come back to the Quran and Salah as they start to remember why this is so important. And I said that very clearly. Remember why it's so important. We'll talk about teenage years at a later stage. It's already 8:30 now. People are coming to pray Isha. I did not make it all the way through my presentation. And I realize that people have time commitments elsewhere. So we will continue this next in 2 weeks, inshallah. Okay. We'll lost half hour because I was setting up the technical issues. Now that we figured that out, we'll make sure it doesn't happen next time. Jazakallah khair for listening. If you have questions again, you have my email address now. So we will continue inshallah next time. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.